Welcome to this series, Living in Wholeness, brought to you by the Unitive Narrative and Holistic Cosmology Synergy Circles of the Evolutionary Leaders, along with Light on Light publications and media. This series features global thought leaders dialoguing with Dr. Robert Atkinson, developmental psychologist and award-winning author of the 2022 Light on Light book, A New Story of Wholeness, an experiential guide for connecting the human family. Forward by Jean Houston, afterword by Deepak Chopra. I'm Dr. Kurt Johnson of the Evolutionary Leaders Synergy Circles and Light on Light. Each video will engage Dr. Atkinson in a discussion with a global thought leader on the themes in his book. Drawing from mythology, mysticism, rites of passage, and psychology, this book is a synthesis of his work in personal myth-making, soul-making, and storytelling to identify a pattern within our unconscious that guides our evolving consciousness, transforms our lives, keeps our focus on the wholeness of all things, and keeps humanity on its evolutionary trajectory. Framed by a clear expression of the principles underlying this pattern, New Story of Wholeness uncovers the innate pattern for living into wholeness by laying out all of the tools that are needed to identify that pattern within our own life experience. The guest or guests of each video will be introduced immediately after this short introduction of Dr. Robert Atkinson. Dr. Robert Atkinson, PhD, award-winning author, educator, and developmental psychologist, is a 2020 Gold Nautilus Book Award winner and co-editor of Our Moment of Choice, Evolutionary Visions and Hope for the Future, and a 2017 Silver Nautilus Book Award winner for The Story of Our Time, From Duality to Interconnectedness to Oneness. He's also the author and co-editor of 9 other books, including A New Story of Wholeness, an experiential guide for connecting the human family, 2022, The Year of Living Deeply, a memoir of 1969, 2019, Mystic Journey, Getting to the Heart of Your Soul's Story, 2012, and The Gift of Stories, 1995. With a PhD in cross-cultural human development from the University of Pennsylvania and a postdoctoral fellowship at the University of Chicago, he is professor emeritus at the University of Southern Maine and an internationally recognized authority on life story interviewing, pioneer in the techniques of personal myth-making and soul-making. He's director of the Story Commons and founder of the One Planet Peace Forum and a member of the Evolutionary Leaders. You can find out more at robertatkinson.net. So let's go over now and introduce the guest for this episode's discussion. In this first episode, Bob is in conversation with 3-time Emmy-nominated actor and author Rainn Wilson, best known for his role as Dwight Schrute on NBC's The Office, who has also just released a new book, Soul Boom: Why We Need a Spiritual Revolution, and it's already on the New York Times bestseller list. They interview each other on some of the main themes in each of their new books.
Hey, everybody. It's me, Rainn Wilson, and I was really excited to sit down with my new good friend and fellow author. How do you like that, Bob? We can call each other authors.
Fellow authors, yeah, great.
Fellow authors. Dr. Robert Atkinson, and we've both got new books out. And Bob, I was very inspired by your previous book, A Story of Our Time. And your new book is A New Story of Wholeness, an experiential guide to connecting the human family. That's a pretty big topic. It doesn't get much bigger than that. And I mean, there's so many questions. I enjoyed the book so much. And you say in it that we were created whole and perfect. We were created whole and perfect. So this is contrary to a lot of other religious beliefs, you know, with the concept of like original sin. So which is it? Are we born sinful, or are we created whole and perfect? Do we have original wholeness? And where did that idea come from? Can we start with that question?
Yeah, thanks so much, Rainn. Great to be with you. And yeah, I think we should start with that. When we talk about a new story of wholeness, it's important to start off with an understanding that we are created whole and perfect. And even beyond that, that the idea that there is a direction and purpose to all of creation itself. This brings in the principle of evolution, which, when we understand that from the perspective of both science and spirituality, says that evolution is directional toward ever wider circles of unity, and that in all realms, all things are tied together and evolve through a process of maturation, decline, eventual renewal, always toward their inherent potential. This means that evolution and our being created whole and perfect never follows a straight line, but rather an unfolding of built-in ups and downs, spiraling toward renewal. So the idea that we are created whole and perfect actually comes from Baha'u'llah, who about 1.75 centuries ago compared the human body to the body of the entire human family in explaining this transformational process when he said, "Regard the world as the human body, which, though at its creation whole and perfect, hath been afflicted through various causes with grave disorders and maladies. The mightiest instrument for the healing of all the world is the union of all its peoples." There's a lot to unpack there. First, he's shows us how the human body and the entire human family are created upon the same principle of wholeness. And if we take a closer look at the human body as a quick reference point, we have a system that's designed to maintain its own wholeness within the greater whole. But the human body didn't start off as we know it, but rather at conception with two cells becoming one. It then takes weeks and months in the womb for the fetus to undergo a process of cell division and differentiation that leads to one of, if not the most incredible levels of unity and diversity found in nature. And even after we're born, it takes many more years for our body to evolve into a system where its eventual 30 trillion different cells and some 80 different organs, each with a unique purpose, perform their vital life-sustaining functions while expressing this complex multi-layered form of unity and diversity to work together in harmony and balance through a unity of purpose in maintaining its inherent wholeness and motion, or its innate state of health as a whole. So the human body is a system created in wholeness that operates according to the governing principle of cooperation to ensure the healthy functioning of the whole, but at the same time goes through many developmental stages, each involving another process of transformation to achieve its potential. And that's what health is all about. The health of the body is contingent upon the unity and wholeness of every cell and every organ. So is the health of society contingent upon the unity and wholeness of every member of the entire human family. So the second thing we notice from this quote is that this innate wholeness is the remedy for an ailing humanity, just as it is for the individual. And there's even more to this quote. We can extrapolate from it 3 developmental phases of our individual and collective evolution. First, as the quote says, we are created whole and perfect. But as we know from sacred stories like the Garden of Eden and Pandora's box and many others, things didn't stay that way. The second phase began after this fall from wholeness that brought about many millennia of separation, conflict, struggle, through being afflicted by various causes with grave disorders and maladies. The third phase is that there is a resolution, a remedy for the healing of all the world, and that is the union of all its peoples. Healing is making the whole whole. So there are those three phases of our personal and collective evolution. We came from wholeness, spent many millennia in the throes of separation and duality, and we now have at our fingertips the remedy for returning to our wholeness. So what does created whole and perfect really mean? It means having the innate capacity to evolve into a complex system that is complete and within which all of its parts function in balance, harmony, and unity as one whole, but that we are also designed to go through a periodic process of transformation and renewal to maintain that wholeness. And this is where we are right now. After having lived with a consciousness of duality and separation for an extended time, we're entering a unitive age leading to harmony and peace built upon a consciousness of wholeness. A new story of wholeness is needed now to frame this interconnectedness. It's time to come together again through unitive narratives to share our stories of living into wholeness. This is the natural outcome of a process of evolution that leads us to the realization of our interdependency as one human family with one common heritage and destiny. So wholeness is the remedy for an ailing humanity as well as for what ails us individually. With all the afflictions and maladies that we experience in life, transformation is needed to return us to our original wholeness. Thanks for that great question, Rainn, which brings us to your book. So I'd like to ask you a question.
Sure.
Your new book is called Soul Boom, Why We Need a Spiritual Revolution. Now
And I
that's
just
not
happen to have a copy right here. Look at that.
there we are.
Convenient.
How beautiful. And so that's not about a population boom, right? But more about how the 9 billion of us on this planet are becoming more conscious that we are souls with a body rather than the other way around, and how that would change everything on the planet for all of us. Is that kind of what you mean by your title?
Well, yes, that's one aspect. I think our work is so much in alignment, and that's why I give you a special thanks. And I put, as in the end, I put a list of books that greatly inspired me and that you should consider reading. I put your book, The Story of Our Time. I was greatly inspired by your work, and I think we come to a similar resolution, which is that, in the Vedanta, it's what you're describing is called the illusion of separateness. And it's kind of the central thesis of some of the oldest spiritual writings on planet Earth. I mean, we're talking writings that go back 3,000 or 4,000 years. And this idea that we appear to be separate entities, but in actuality, we are one. And I'm going to do a little spoiler alert, because you inspired me so much to think in this way that I really ended my book with similar quotes, and a quote from Abdul Baha about our essential wholeness and oneness. And these metaphors run throughout the Baha'i writings, right? So you're the waves of one sea, the leaves of one branch, the flowers of one garden, etc., like that we have to think of ourselves as a garden, as a whole tree, as a whole ocean, and not as individual waves, which is, in contemporary American society, it's live free or die, don't tread on me, every man for himself kind of mentality. And we have to move past that extremely immature way of viewing our reality. So you asked me a very good question there. I think that essentially when we view ourselves as spiritual beings, our entire perspective shifts. And I notice this when I speak to young people a lot, that if you realize, and Abdu'l-Baha says the reality of man is spiritual, right? And only when he lives in the spirit can he be happy. So when I realize that I'm a spiritual being having a human experience, having a corporal experience, that shifts a lot of things for me. I wake up in the morning and go, oh, I'm a spiritual being having a human experience. So this both changes my day-to-day spiritual experience as I'm on having my coffee and returning phone calls and paying bills and whatnot. And when I take the telescope back and make it a macroscope looking down on humanity and all, 8-9 billion of us, that we're all a bunch of spiritual beings, and we really are then waves of one ocean. And I'm just going to read a little bit from Soul Boom, Why We Need a Spiritual Revolution. And this idea was very much inspired by the Baha'i writings, but also by the work that you've been doing. Picture yourself walking on a beach, watching the waves. You notice each wave crash to shore and dissolve into foam. You see new waves form and ride forward toward the sand. You observe the distinct curve and beauty of each individual crest and fall. Then something subtly shifts in your outlook. You notice that what you are actually taking in is the ocean itself. Your entire perspective shifts and expands as you begin to consider the totality of the ocean, its depth and breadth, its mysteries, currents, and storms, its awesome beauty, and its life-providing bounty, the fish that swim in it, the moisture that rises from it to form the clouds above you. You realize that you yourself are like a single wave on a much larger sea. And like a wave on the ocean, you are one small part of a much grander, more mysterious, powerful, and beautiful totality. And then I quote Abdu'l-Baha, "Your souls are waves on the sea of the spirit. Although each individual is a distinct wave, the ocean is one. All are united in God. We must not consider the separate waves alone, but the entire sea. We should rise from the individual to the whole." And then I say, and as we rise from the individual to the whole, our fate can ultimately be a hopeful one. And that's exactly what you addressed in your work. So I want to go back to your book, Bob, and I'm going to just ping pong the question right back to you. You talk about patterns of wholeness, and you use the human body as a metaphor. It's a metaphor that's in the Baha'i writings a lot. I use it in my book. It's such a handy dandy spiritual metaphor to describe our spiritual reality. But you talk about a pattern of wholeness that emerges from within us and the universality of a process of transformation that is both personal and collective at the same time. And I'm fascinated by this idea as well. It's in some ways it's in book 5 in the Ruhi books of, the twofold moral purpose, right? We have our personal journey and our collective journey. So can you talk about this pattern of wholeness and how it works in these two paradigms?
Yeah, thanks again for that great question, and also for reading from your book, that beautiful passage. That was great. And since we're sharing books, I'll put mine up too.
There it is.
There it is.
I love the cover.
And you can
What's on the cover there? What is that design?
That's called Holos, Holos, designed by Brian Berman, and it's actually a sculpture, and he, as the artist, he says it represents oneness and wholeness. So that was why I used it for the cover. But and that also I think is a really good image of the concept of a pattern that emerges from within, and that is also part of a greater process and pattern. So there is, I think there is that pattern within that's meant to guide us back to this wholeness. And but the problem is, from this physical temporal world we live in, sets so many things in our way of recognizing this wholeness that regular periodic transformation becomes necessary for our progress and evolution. But knowing that a pattern does exist within our unconscious that is meant to guide our evolving consciousness, that makes the whole process much more manageable as we live out everything in our everyday lives, whether they're good things or what we think of as not so good things. It's all part of that pattern and has a purpose and a place within the pattern. So in this concept of a pattern, everything really is so interdependent that even apparent opposites like yin and yang and feminine and masculine, they all become complementary, interrelated halves of the same whole, balancing, integrating, uniting, and transcending their assumed duality. And this is the wholeness that many mystic traditions and mindfulness practices seek. It's a state of consciousness central to indigenous wisdom traditions. And it's a unifying field of awareness that's available to all of us. A vision of this wholeness is found in the Hermetic principle of as above, so below, all things accomplishing the miracles of the one thing. And this is also the vision that Plato offers us when he says, perhaps there is a pattern set up in the heavens for one who desires to see it, and having seen it, to find one in himself. Another way to see this same thing in an even clearer way is from Abdu'l-Baha, who said a little over a century ago, the evolution of existence is one, the divine order is one. All things, great and small, are subject to one law and one order. So what if there were other ways we could discover this holistic law of correspondence between the macrocosm and the microcosm? What if there is a pattern within us designed to maintain the harmony of the whole? First of all, patterns are what allow us to find meaning in and make sense of all things, especially when they connect apparent randomness. The earliest indigenous peoples observed patterns in nature that gave them wisdom to live by. They observed the cycles of nature and applied these to their lives. And built into their rites of passage was a process leading to and through transformation to assist and enable the transition to the next stage of life. Arnold van Gennep, an anthropologist, identified this pattern as a core process, taking the initiate through 3 phases of separation, transition, and incorporation. This ritual process was designed to guide the young person from a dependent state through independence and on to interdependence within one's community. Transformation is at the core of this pattern that keeps us moving along a path intended to guide us from separation to union or wholeness. This central pattern of transformation can also be discovered within the basic structure of story itself. It's not just beginning, middle, and end, but on a deeper and more meaningful level, beginning, muddle, and resolution. The muddles or challenges we face represent the core of the pattern, bringing the process of transformation to its completion or resolution. So this hidden thread of wholeness connecting us all also runs deep in the mysticism of all sacred traditions. Around 1900, Evelyn Underhill described the mystic way as an androgynous journey of spiritual transformation, following a pattern that leads from awakening to purification to union. Some 50 years later, in mythology, Another version of this pattern was made popular by Joseph Campbell, who put together the archetypes of the world's myths to form the pattern he called the monomyth, consisting of a journey of departure, initiation, and return. This pattern of living into wholeness also finds its way into the psychology of Carl Jung. He called this the individuation process, which consists of the conscious experience of the archetypes we are born with, embedded in our psyche or unconscious, bubbling up from within, released by life experiences, making us aware of their innate existence and enabling the merging of opposites into a new whole. This involves great struggle and takes in the stages of birth of the ego, death of the ego, and birth of the whole self. What we end up with when we merge these practices and ways of knowing is a blueprint for living into wholeness, which brings with it a unitive consciousness. This blueprint consists of three main parts called wholeness, path of purification, and return to wholeness. This pattern is found within us that connects us to the heavens, as Plato envisioned. An essential part of our archetypal DNA, this pattern transforms our lives, keeps our focus on the wholeness of all things, and keeps humanity on its evolutionary path, all at the same time. And we become aware of this universal pattern as we communicate more with the inner realm and as the eternal bursts forth from our unconscious, giving us a timeless understanding that countless others have experienced before us. When this happens, this universal pattern becomes a roadmap for achieving the greatest expansion of consciousness that is humanly possible. Through it, we not only fulfill our innate potential, but also, by naturally wanting to pass this understanding on to others, we would transform the world in the process. And this brings us back to Soul Boom. Interesting how we can just weave in and out of each other's books here and still be talking about the same kinds of things. In your book, you offer 7 pillars for a spiritual revolution. Those are great. And one particularly I like is create a new mythology of humanity. Another is destroy adversarial systems. I'm sure there's so much that can be said about these, and they're so central to the process of transformation. What are those pillars for a spiritual revolution boil down to, and how do they ignite a transformation that we've been talking about?
Well, thanks, Bob, and thanks for what you're saying. That's gives me a lot of food for thought. And you asked me about mythology, and I think that word is so important because it's kind of the story behind the story. And when I finished the book Soul Boom, and it was due at my publishers this last fall, I realized the book wasn't done. It was done in terms of my outline and what I had pitched and what I had proposed. But it ended on somewhat of a downer, and I realized that I needed to provide some positive, proactive things that people could do if we wanted to kind of be part of a spiritual revolution. So I had to write a new chapter, and I had to do it fast. I had like a couple weeks to write a whole chapter, but I'm really excited that I did, because what I did is the final chapter is the 7 pillars of a spiritual revolution. And I provide 7 kind of tangible ideas about what people can do to, further a kind of a spiritual transformation of society. There's a lot of books out, Bob, and we got to this topic early on, about personal transformation. You can look in the self-help section. You can look in the spirituality section. You can read Tony Robbins. You can read Eckhart Tolle. You can read books on mindfulness and on happiness that have to do with personal transformation, being happier, being more successful, being more balanced, finding peace and meaning in your life. There's very few texts that then shift the perspective to the societal transformation, which is something I think you and I are both very interested in. And that's, you know, kind of what the whole Baha'i faith thing is about, really. And so I have these 7 ideas in here. I say, don't just protest, build something. That's one of them. Foster joy and squash cynicism is one of them. But write a new mythology of humanity, I thought was important, because the predominant mythology of humans is that we are aggressive, backstabbing creatures that are driven by self-interest, and that this warlike part of ourselves has driven our progress. It's an important part of capitalism. It's an important part of how we got to as successful as we are today, quote unquote successful, at least materially. And that we're tribal, that we think our tribe is better than another tribe, that our tribe wants to kill another tribe and dominate another tribe, and that this has been happening since time immemorial. And yes, you can draw a line through that mythology, through that story. You absolutely can. When my son was taking AP World European History, it was the most preposterous class in the world, and he just had to memorize war after war after war, and general after general, and then he won this war, and then they had this war, and they lost this war, and this, and that becomes a mythology. That's how we start to think of humanity's progress. But there's another mythology. You mentioned indigenous faith traditions. We have thousands and thousands of years of indigenous peoples. Now, certainly there was war between indigenous peoples. I'm not saying they were all just peacefully watching the antelope play, but there is a greater and deeper and richer understanding of a peaceful connection to the natural world. Time and time again, humans have cooperated. They have consulted. They have built communities. They have built rich, diverse communities and moved forward and fostered trade and understanding. They have come together in councils and meeting places to resolve disputes. So, and if we're going to move forward, we have to really reimagine humanity and its role and its mythology, that we are capable of cooperation, consultation, and instead of selfishness, what I would call otherishness, putting other people's desires first. Of course, we learn a great deal about this in the Baha'i faith. And the other section you mentioned is the taking apart adversarial systems. This is something that Dr. Michael Carlberg writes about much better than I in Culture of Contest and other of his works. But this idea that our systems are based on competition. Our current systems are based on one-upsmanship and on contest. And every system, education, healthcare, agriculture, it's about profit, it's about one-upping someone else, and certainly our governmental systems and our, legislative systems. So we have to, again, take that telescope and rise up above planet Earth and look down. If aliens were looking down at us, they would see that humans are driven and have based their systems on competition and contest and aggression. It's kind of the worst qualities of humanity. Our most animalistic qualities are what our system, and surprise, surprise, our systems are breaking down. So we're not going to fix these systems by passing legislation and slapping a Band-Aid on it. Like, we're not going to fix racism in police departments by mandating that 30% of police forces are people of color. Now, let's say that's just an example. Now, can we do that? Sure. Would that maybe be helpful? Sure, that might be helpful. That's not going to fix the problem, however, because the way that our incarceration programs work and our policing forces programs work are inherently kind of I mean, you could do a whole book, and there have been whole books, Michelle Alexander, and there's so many great books that have been written about these topics, far better than I. But you have to take a much larger view of crime, why crime exists in a society, about injustice, about economics, about how to police effectively, and but you have to dig deeper in creating communities that deeply, deeply care about each other and will make sacrifices to their own comfort and material success to care for other communities that are that don't necessarily look like them. So until we really dig into those underlying spiritual diseases, we will not be able to fix the problem. So, but the first thing we need to do is see that our systems are built kind of adversarially and begin the dismantling process and the reinvention process of those symptoms. So thanks for asking, Bob. I did want to ask about your two books. This one is A New Story of Wholeness, and your last one, which I think in here, The Story of Our Time. You, how do you see the difference between the two books? How do you see an evolution of one book to the other? I mean, similar themes, right? It's mythology and wholeness and bringing people together. But how do you see a difference between the two books and how they connect and what's new about the new one?
Yeah, great. Yeah, that's great. They are very much connected along the same lines. And I could say that they're both about the story of our time. But the difference is that the first one, with that title, takes a big picture, the whole book is more of a holistic perspective on the story of our time, bringing in how we are collectively evolving toward a sense of wholeness and living toward that. The next one, the new one, this A New Story of Wholeness. What is new about this is that it's identifying a timeless universal pattern, as I went through all of the forms it takes from mysticism to rites of passage to mythology to story. All those forms are expressions of that same pattern. So this new book brings the story of our time to the personal level. And it's also a guidebook, a handbook for identifying and writing our version of the story of our time, or how we individually have experienced that pattern of beginning in wholeness, having gone through our own period of separation and duality, and how we have come back to our innate sense of wholeness. So that's how the two are connected. The first one starts out on the and really remains on the collective level. The second one brings it to the personal level to show how we can how we each have our own version of that larger story. And so I would just bring the two together right now and close with this idea that a new story of wholeness is emerging from within us, aligning all our endeavors with the wholeness and motion around us. And what's doing that? One of the things that's doing that is the principle of consciousness and the principle of wholeness, as well as the principle of evolution, because all three of those together make up the meta principle of consciousness evolves toward wholeness. And it's all happening on the collective and the individual level at the same time. So this has been great, Rainn. Thanks so much for allowing us to talk about both of our books at the same time. And show.
It's fun. And that was such a beautiful point and a beautiful quote you read at the end. And that really does tie it all together. And I love your work. It's very inspiring to me. And I hope folks will check it out. And it's fun having a little book chat. What a great time. This has been just a profound pleasure. Thanks so much for setting this up. And I've really enjoyed getting to know you, your work, and having this conversation.
Great fun. Thank you, Rainn.
Well, thank you so much, and thanks to our viewers. Each of the subsequent videos in this important video series will feature discussions with Dr. Robert Atkinson in the context of his book, A New Story of Wholeness, an experiential guide for connecting the human family. You can update yourself regularly on the series at the websites posted just hereafter, which include robertatkinson.net, lightonlight.us, the Light on Light Press and Light on Light Magazine Facebook pages, and at the Evolutionary Leaders channel at YouTube. That's YouTube at the Evolutionary Leaders channel. Thank you for joining us, and please tell your colleagues about this important video series. This is Dr. Kurt Johnson of Light on Light Media and of the Synergy Circles of the Evolutionary Leaders project of the Source of Synergy Foundation. And please also see all of our emerging work on the central issues of our time at evolutionaryleaders.net and holomovement.net. That's HOLO movement.net.